Hi, everybody, and thanks for coming to our Leaders in the Field. Today we are interviewing my friend Denise Hogrefe, and she is an occupational therapist with Los Angeles Unified School System. And she's here to answer some of our questions about what it is to be an occupational therapist and to just generally tell us about kind of a day in the life of being an occupational therapist for a large public school system. So welcome, Denise. If you'd like to introduce yourself and just kind of give us a little bit of background.
Sure. Thank you so much, Trish, for asking me to come. I have worked as an occupational therapist for scarily 26 years. It doesn't seem like it's that long, which also speaks to the fact that it's a great profession to be in. I attended graduate school at New York University. So kind of was an East Coast girl for most of my life, and then moved out here to Los Angeles in 1996 and worked in some private clinics doing pediatric occupational therapy, and then joined Los Angeles Unified School District in 1999. I have only worked in pediatrics throughout my career, so I can kind of give you a good understanding of what it is as a pediatric occupational therapist. However, it is, I think, even though you all are studying early childhood, one of the things that I think is really appealing about the field of occupational therapy is that we do work with individuals throughout the age span. So I feel like in some ways it's a career that you can get into that has some built-in ways of avoiding burnout within a job, because there's a really wide variety of settings and ages and types of individuals that you can work with. And while I've kind of always stayed within the school systems, my first job after graduating was with the New York City public school system. However, I think that there is a really broad array of areas that you can work in and specialties that you can get into, which makes it really appealing, I think.
So as you were speaking, a couple questions came up that have been asked by some students is, how did you know this was the age group that you were most interested working in?
That's a really good question. I guess even when I was in college, I went to a small school in Ohio. I grew up in Pennsylvania, but yay, Steelers. And I knew I wanted to get, I knew I wanted to do something with children. And so I was exploring various fields. I have a degree, an undergraduate degree in biology and psychology. And so at one point I looked at research. And that was something that I decided, while it was interesting, I kind of wanted to be more hands-on and be able to take that research and be able to actually implement it. And so I was looking for options and actually started tutoring elementary aged student in the local area where I was going to undergraduate, who had cerebral palsy. And I was just hired as kind of a tutor to come and work with her because she was really struggling. She had a lot of challenges with holding her pencil and scissor skills and all of those things. So I would go over there and we would just problem solve things to do and chat. And I really enjoyed that kind of problem solving and detective work. And so that kind of led me to explore what occupational therapy was. My cousin was an occupational therapist, and so I was talking to her, and she had said, "Oh, if you really enjoyed that, you should really look into this field."
Excellent. So you kind of fell into it.
I did.
So one of the things that I found most fascinating when I was working with you, so just a little background, when I was teaching, Denise and I met because she was the occupational therapist for the group of preschoolers that I was working with. One of the things that I found most exciting was Denise's knowledge of sensory integration. and occupational therapists I'd worked with before, classes I'd taken in school, nobody had really focused on this concept of sensory integration. Denise, do you mind kind of talking a little bit about what that even is?
Sure. Um, so we are sensory beings. Everything that we do is with our senses. So we take in information from the world and from others through our senses, and we respond. All of the movements and actions and words are all coming from our sensory systems. And so the late Dr. Jean Ayers, who was an occupational therapist who worked in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, really wanted to look at how individuals with learning disabilities and autism, how their sensory systems were really causing challenges for them, how that if you weren't interpreting the information or getting enough information from your senses, how that could really impact what you were able to do in the world. And the thing that was kind of novel about her at the time was that she really was most interested in looking at kind of the occupations of what we do. So kind of what we do throughout our life, what our roles were, and how those things were really impacted. So she really came from that idea of the most important thing is to look at function and being able to interact in the environment and do the things that we need to do to be able to be as independent as possible. And she saw there being kind of a foundation in sensory, because that was really the building block for us developmentally. When we're babies, we use our senses really to learn about the world. And so sensory integration really looks at first identifying how our sensory systems are working for the individual. And then as we find potential deficits, then working within those systems in a very deliberate way. So I think sometimes the view, if people have heard about sensory integration or you've seen an aspect of it, is kind of putting somebody on a swing and have them swing, or having them spin. But it's really looking at how the sensory systems are working and which ones are allowing us to be able to do certain activities and which ones are preventing us, and then tailoring a program with specific amounts, specific types, specific lengths of time that we do certain activities, and then building on those activities and making sure that it's a collaborative process, which is one of the things that I fell in love with and made sure, and why I kind of furthered and did a lot of training in this, is because it's really the idea that you have to be actively working and engaging for it to have meaning and for you to improve. So, so as much as the child can interact with making choices or showing you enjoyment about what they're doing, you really work with that balance and kind of incorporate what the students enjoy doing and helping them build that repertoire of activities that they really like.
And I have to say, she's really good at it too. So, so you were talking about sensory integration as kind of more study. Can you please kind of walk us through the different levels of education in the field of occupational therapy?
Sure. So there kind of the first starting point that one could do if they chose to was to be a COTA, or a Certified Occupational Therapy Assistant. So that is a 2-year degree, then with additional training based on different types of treatment kind of aspects, if there are certain specialties you want to get into. And the difference between those and a registered occupational therapist would be that the Certified Occupational Therapy Assistant would not be doing assessments. So their role is kind of treatment, kind of following through with plans. They would collaborate with an occupational therapist to develop the treatment plan, and they would then kind of implement that plan, kind of follow up, provide progress information, but they would be working with a registered occupational therapist on kind of generating reports, and the registered occupational therapist would have to do all of the assessments. The registered occupational therapist, at this point, I believe it is solely a master's degree program. And there are programs, I failed, I apologize, to have looked up where all the programs were in this area. I know very established programs are at Cal State Dominguez Hills. USC also has a very established program. San Jose State is a program that, while it's a bit of a distance, is also a very well thought of program within the field. Those are the primary ones that I'm aware of. There are some other smaller programs. I would caution anybody to really look and make sure that in looking at programs, that one makes sure the accreditation of it and so forth, because I know there have been a few things that have popped up over the years that have not been accredited. And so there have been some challenges with people then being able to actually work. So I think in any field that you're looking into, that's an important thing. So within both of those professions, there would be an aspect of doing what we call field work, which is kind of internships. From that perspective of kind of going out into the field, you start off with like level ones where you would just be going and observing. And maybe kind of helping out with things, but never really kind of taking over as the treating therapist, but just kind of getting some exposure. A lot of times there are certain requirements. I know, and well, it seems like a million years ago, so this may have changed. I know when I was at NYU, they would not allow pediatrics to be one of the things that we did our field works in, because they saw it as a specialty. So some programs allow it, some programs don't. They tend to divide things up through mental health, because occupational therapists is really, its origin really comes through mental health services, and then physical disabilities. And then within that, sometimes you can do pediatrics from that standpoint. So you would also do level 2, which for a registered occupational therapist, you're required to do 2 of those. I believe it's the same for a certified occupational therapy assistant. And those are 3-month internships that you would do at a specific site. And it would be kind of a 5-day a week. And through the course of those, that time period, those 3 months, you would start to take on the caseload, and by the end, you would be treating with the supervision of whoever your fieldwork facilitator is. And so that's where you kind of get your hands-on experience. You get to take what you've learned in the classroom and kind of get an opportunity to implement it. Now, different programs, as I said, those are kind of the basic flow of how it goes. Usually, your coursework is, some programs will embed the fieldworks within the coursework, but generally when you get to your final level 2, that's you've completed your coursework, and you're just, that's the last piece before you graduate.
So it kind of parallels the teaching. No, it parallels the
Yeah.
teaching where you do your classwork and then go into the field supervised, and then that's it, you're there. Excellent.
And then
is there specialties afterwards,
yes,
after you're certified to have your own caseload?
So yeah, there are a number of things. You know, for some people, they can go on and do additional coursework, and there are various practical and written tests to do, things like becoming a certified hand therapist. And I have several fellow therapists that I work with who, even though they're in pediatrics, did go and get that because of the population of students that they were working with. They felt that would be really beneficial. You can get a, similar to the board certification in teaching, you can get a pediatric board certification as well, which would be additional study and sitting for a national board test with respect to that. There's also specialties in things like specific treatment techniques, such as sensory integration. There's a series of courses and tests and practical aspects that have to be fulfilled to get that. There is an aspect of being able to do some treatment techniques that are aimed more at individuals with physical disabilities, so neurodevelopmental treatment, which is called NDT within the field. So that would be an additional specialty. So, and there's, just as in teaching, there's lots of different professional development courses that you can take to get more specialty and specific types of treatment, dealing with kind of visual perception and other motor kind of based activities.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, each state has a licensure now. So when you graduate, you will take a state, you will take a national board test to become registered. But each state, you also have to maintain a license. And so we do have to, every 2 years, show that we have taken 24 units of continuing ed. So there is that requirement that continuing ed is ongoing. And then for the national kind of registration, it's 36 units every 3 years.
Okay.
But they can overlap.
So one of the questions I'm getting in the chat room is, do you feel like your psychology degree better prepared you to work with some of the children?
Yes, I think it's also really been helpful for working with the families, actually. I think having kind of some grounding in that has been helpful to be able to meet the families where they are based on kind of whatever situations that they're in, being able to address issues that come up. Some of the students I work with have mental health issues, and their families also have mental health issues within the family. So I think that that's kind of allowed me to be able to kind of bridge that gap in some ways and have a little more understanding. But they're also within the public schools, there's a really wide variety of students that we deal with within special ed, and with a real wide variety of diagnoses. So I have had a number of students with mental health issues or who have had trauma, who have special needs, and then in addition to that have had traumatic situations occurring as well. And so therefore, their coping skills are not going to be the same as an individual without a disability. And so I do feel like I have throughout my time kind of been able to rely on that grounding in some ways. And I've tried to kind of continue to take courses in that mental health realm as well, because I think that that's really important. And especially now in the situation that we're in, you know, so much of that mental health, I mean, I feel like I'm using it a lot for myself and my family, not just for my students.
Exactly. Well, that kind of brings us around to a question that I wanted to ask. If you could kind of walk us through what is just kind of a regular day for an occupational therapist in a large public school system pre-COVID, and then kind of how has it changed and how do you work with children through Zoom and their families, and just kind of talk about the change. But first, kind of just what would pre-COVID, what would a normal day look like for you?
So if you're lucky, you're only at one school per day. And I have to say, I absolutely love my job. I do. And I have always loved my job. And I feel very, very fortunate that I was able to find something that I love to do, because I am not in a situation where I can't be working. And so especially when I have a 13 and 14-year-old, and especially when they were little, the idea of having to leave and go to work, being able to do something I love made it all worthwhile. One of the challenges in working at a very large school district is that our department has to cover every school within the district, whether or not there's a student there, because as part of the federal legislation, we're required to provide a free and appropriate education to every student that's within the district. So all 500,000 plus students. Now, not every school has students who qualify for occupational therapy services, but it's very rare that you have one school that you go to every single day, and that's the only school you have on your caseload. So, typically for the occupational therapist, it's usually between 3 and 5 schools that we would have. That may have, some of them may have more students than others. I typically have never had to go between 2 schools in a day, and I would kind of divide up that, looking at the caseload, looking at who the students were and what their needs were, and actually how I had to provide services for them. One school would get the morning. If I was pushing into a lot of classrooms at that school, because sometimes we provide our services in the classroom, sometimes we will pull out students and do individual or small group sessions. So if I'm pushing into a classroom, I may be targeting a certain time period within the day. If it's writing time and we're working on grasp and copying from the board, I may be kind of going in during times when they're doing a lot of that. If we're having difficulty with copying from the board and the student's struggling in math, I might go in when they're working on doing problems on the board and kind of focus on some of those skills. Sometimes I target it just a time of day that's really challenging for the student in class from the standpoint of their regulation level. So a time that's really frustrating, a time where, we're leading up to lunch and they've been sitting for a really long time. So I may be targeting that time to kind of help develop some strategies for in the classroom or outside of the classroom, or practicing right before they go out to recess or lunch, what kinds of activities they can perform during those time periods. And then any of our preschoolers, because their day is a little bit shorter in some of the programs, then I tend to try and see them in the mornings, and we'll do groups a lot of times with those students, unless there are very specific needs. So because with a lot of those students, I find that it's really helpful to be able to provide that basis for the teacher to be able to carry that through for the rest of the week. Yeah. So we'll kind of do sensory motor groups. We may do fine motor groups and kind of incorporate that throughout so that they could do that for each day following in some capacity. We do, I know that there was a question about the amount of time. It kind of varies based on the student. Our recommendations really are supposed to be based on the individual needs of the student. So there's no set amount, no prescription that comes down for if you have this disability or this functional level, you get this amount of service. So it's really kind of based on what the needs are found in the assessment. So some students I see for 300 minutes a year, just to follow up on some programs we've put into place and make sure that they work. Other students I can see, I may see for 60 minutes or 90 minutes a week, spread out during the course of a week based on the amount of service that they're getting and what their needs are. I tend to do my individual sessions or pull-out sessions more in the afternoons to try to avoid kind of those math and language art time periods. And so those sessions might be working on just specific underlying skills for the student. We may be doing them inside of a inside space, or we might be doing it outside. After lunchtime is finished, we might be working on some gross motor skills and sensory motor skills out on the playground or so forth.
So how has all that fun changed uh, with COVID?
Um, well, technology has been fun.
Yeah.
It's really challenging because our job is really hands-on. Um, it's very hard to be able to do the things that we do without truly being able to see what's going on. Um, I think everybody is really trying their best, and I know the families that I'm working with are truly trying, but it's some families I'm working with are using a phone to Zoom with me.
Oh,
Some are using Chromebooks, which don't allow for the interaction, so that you can't the child, you can't give remote control to somebody on a Chromebook so that they can interact on the screen. They can't annotate with Zoom on a Chromebook. So it's, in some ways it's kind of made me be much more creative as an OT,
yeah.
which isn't a bad thing. It's added a lot of hours to my workday.
Yes.
Um, and, there's been an aspect of just, a lot of directing, a lot of that parent coaching aspect of early intervention comes into play a lot, from that perspective of really trying to make parents feel comfortable being able to kind of lead the session. And it's hard as the therapist as well, because we are so used to being the person who is kind of the leader, and the parent being there to kind of learn about the things that we're doing and take pieces of it home. And now the families are having to be the ones who are kind of the leaders, and we're the observers, and kind of giving some direction. I feel like the technology piece has been one of the most challenging aspects of things, because trying to instruct a child how to, I need your camera down, now it needs to be up, ends up being more of my session than I wish it was.
Right.
um, you know we've worked on taking pictures of things and sending me samples so I can actually see what has gone on. Movement kinds of things where we may have had, a playground equipment to work with, or one of our therapy clinics to work in. We're using pillows and rolled up socks to toss at different objects, and, you know, canned foods to work on strengthening, and rubber bands and spaghetti to put into strainers, to work on eye hand coordination. So, making Play-Doh, from that standpoint, to kind of work on things, and making stacking rings with spaghetti or toothpicks and Play-Doh and Cheerios. So there's definitely been kind of a learning curve, I think, for all of us. And some students have adapted well to it, and some are struggling with the aspect of it being virtual, not being able to be in person with somebody and interact in that way. It can be really hard for anybody. I know for me, to be on Zoom for 7 hours a day is not easy.
No.
There's a huge amount of fatigue, trying to stay engaged. For some of our students, that engagement and that interaction is already such a significant challenge.
Yeah.
And so it can get really overwhelming. And that has really, I think, made me try and be as creative as I can, and really focus on what those interests that I know exist for those kids, and trying to pull them out. And for some kids, it means doing a lot of, the videos and so forth on the screen. And for others, it's like, okay, go get this, this, and this, and we're going to build something right here, or we're going to do these movement things, because being able to interact with the screen is much different. And so, like, we've got the whole family up, kind of doing ocean animal yoga.
And just as an aside, Denise is probably the most creative person I've come across. We used to joke with each other that I was a frustrated occupational therapist and she was a frustrated preschool teacher. So that we we should have switched at one point, but I don't have all the other education part. Um, so one of the things that I did want to, you've kind of touched on a lot of the parts that of your occupation that you love, but if you could just kind of highlight some of the things that make you love being an occupational therapist, some of the things that just kind of keep you going on the bad days and um, make it worthwhile.
Um, Definitely the kids.
Yeah.
I have to say, that idea. I mean, and I have students that make my day because they are so excited to see me. I have other students who aren't so excited to see me, but the fact that they interact with me, or we get those few minutes throughout the time period that we're together where I get some eye contact or I get a response that they want to do something again. I mean, that's, I can't think of things that are more rewarding from a job perspective than that. Um, I really enjoy interacting with the varying levels of people that are involved in the student's life. Definitely one of the positive things about COVID is I'm really getting a chance on a much more consistent basis to interact with families. Some families previous to this, I would definitely talk with or see on a weekly basis to do things. Other families, we would touch base only every couple of months to kind of check in on how things are going, or we would be sending notes back and forth, but it wasn't the same type of communication that I'm having now. So that's one of the silver linings with COVID is I feel like that those relationships and kind of really getting a sense of how I can redefine how I can help that student has been a big change. I think the detective work of figuring a student out has always been kind of that thing. I was always that kid who wanted to figure out why something worked the way it did, and may have taken apart a few things that I shouldn't have with my brother. As a child that my mother was less than happy about. So I think that, just like that aspect of always looking, and I think working within the schools, my day is never the same. So that's the nice aspect, that even if it's been a really bad morning, I know I'm going to be in a totally different scenario in the afternoon. So that kind of helps keep me going, and getting to interact with various teachers, going to different school sites. It allows me to kind of learn new things. I get to go into lots of different classrooms and see how different things are run. So I think all of those things kind of make it worthwhile.
So the balance would be what are the most challenging aspects of an occupational therapist, specifically an occupational therapist in, like you were talking about, a large public school system?
So I must say the paperwork is quite a lot, and it's ever changing. So whenever I've done new staff training, I've always told people that we have a lot of paperwork and you're not going to like some of it, but don't really stress too much about it because it'll change. And they're always coming up with a new form or a new way to do it. And the way that they told you last week is no longer going to be the way that you do it. So I think, like, kind of that procedural aspect of things and all the paperwork is my least favorite thing to do. But the necessity in it, I guess. And I think, within the schools, one of the biggest challenges as an OT is that we are not a primary provider. We are kind of a support service for what's going on. So it can be challenging when I encounter a student that is having a student success team. So maybe having some challenges in the classroom. They're not ready to look at a special ed assessment, but they want to kind of try and figure out. And I see some things that OT could help with, but until that student is within special education, I can't provide services. And even if they've had an assessment, unless they qualify, occupational therapy can't be something that you qualify for special ed for. So you can have some motor issues and so forth, but if it's not impacting their educational performance or kind of behavioral performance in school to a significant amount, we can't provide services. So in those cases, we really do have to refer families to go explore things through their medical providers. Potentially, if they do have some type of diagnosis, they can go to California Children's Services. If it's more of a physical disability, sometimes a regional center, there may be some things from the mental health aspect that regional center can pick up. But I think that that's probably one of the most frustrating things, working in early intervention and in some of the private clinics prior to making the leap to LA Unified. When I came out here in California, we did an assessment. We determined if there was need. If there was need, we provided service. And in the schools, it doesn't always work that way. And so you have to become creative in giving suggestions, in working with the teachers. And so I think that that's one of, from a clinical aspect, is probably one of the hardest pieces. And I think from kind of that school, you don't ever really belong in any of the schools. You're there, but it's like it's not you don't get the same cohesiveness that you get among school staff.
It's not your home.
It's not your home, no.
Just going back to what you were talking about, is not every child qualifies for occupational therapy, even if you see aspects of things that you could work with the child and it would make their life easier. I think I find that is one of the most frustrating parts, is that level of assessment of having to meet certain criteria, which is frustrating in any system. Can you kind of walk us through, since you're one of the lead occupational therapists, what does an assessment look like? Just in general, kind of what would a parent who's kind of going through an assessment for the first time expect from the occupational therapy standpoint?
So there will always be some type of interview with the school personnel who interacts with the child, be preschool through high school. There's also some type of interview, conversation with the family to get to know what their concerns are, to get to know kind of what some of the routines are at home, how the student does with some of those routines, and with aspects that deal with fine motor. We don't always address self-care skills as OTs based on kind of what the curriculum is driving. So in preschool, we might do more of that because that's part of the curriculum. If a student's in the general ed curriculum, as they get into elementary school and onward, we don't do as much of that because it's not a part of the curriculum, but we still want to know how their hands and how their body is able to balance or manipulate things. So those are things that we may ask. There'll be observations within the student's classroom that the therapist will do. I personally like to do those prior to getting to meet the student, so that I'm just coming in to find out what's going on in third grade, or coming to join in the carpet work during a preschool classroom or centers, because I don't want the students to know that I'm observing them. And even then, they're always very like,
suspicious.
Who are you for? How are you? And then there will always be some type of direct assessment. So that would kind of be maybe a standardized assessment administered to that student. And that would be kind of a pull-out time with the therapist, depending on, it might be scheduled during the school day, or it might be scheduled after school based on what the school schedule is and where the student is attending school. So that would be a combination of activities where you can do some informal observations on how they're performing things, and look at how their hands are doing things. It would be some gross motor activities as well to kind of look at balance and a lot of those foundational skills that we use, the use of the two sides of the body together. And then it would be kind of having conversations also with the child, if possible, to find out what they feel are easy things to do, what they like to do, what are things that are more challenging for them to do. So kind of getting their perspective as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Those were the big questions that I had for Denise. If anybody has any questions, if you would like to put them in the chat room as we're approaching the end of the hour, and just want to make sure that everybody's questions are heard and are answered. So just to kind of clarify, as people are typing up, what Denise was talking about is really looking at the differences between academics and kind of the self-care at home. So once a child transitions into the public school system and the schools, really a lot of the teaching, the behavioral, the occupational therapy, the physical therapy, the speech, all of it is going to center around how does that child access the academics that the school is providing. And so if it doesn't directly impact the child's ability to access the academic part of the environment, then it leaves a lot of times the teachers and the therapists to be creative, to figure out how to also get those needs met in the realm of academics. And I think that's, just to clarify, make sure I was hearing you correctly, that's kind of that difference that Denise was talking about with the self-care, is you can have that in early childhood. That's part of preschool curriculum, but is not really part of kindergarten curriculum. And so there's kind of that difference. Did I address that correctly?
Yes, yes. And then, although with some of our students who are in the more restrictive special ed settings who may be on the alternate curriculum, then that, that self-care things may follow through with that. But because that's part of their curriculum. But we are really, we have to put on our school hat in some ways, and over top of our OT hat, and really kind of narrow our view, and really look at what are things that are impacting them being able to perform that occupation of a student. And so where are they having challenges, and do they need OT to help with those challenges? Are there other people, and can OT be provided just as a consult to the teacher, just as suggestions, or do we need some direct services with a student?
So just kind of taking the last few minutes and flipping to the parent side. So what would your recommendations as a pediatric occupational therapist be to parents? What would be some of the things that they would be seeing in their child that would possibly cause them to approach the school system and ask for help?
I think if they are a child who is really struggling with using their hands, really having difficulty with manipulating pencils, crayons, scissors, taking a really long time to complete tasks. So, just really being very slow and laborious with their writing, or really having challenges with being able to do writing. Clumsy students that might be really clumsy, may fall a lot, may have a hard time navigating around things, bumping into things. They're coming home, frequently with falls and bumps and situations like that. Students who have a really hard time tolerating different sensory experiences, so get really overwhelmed by noise that really shouldn't typically make us uncomfortable, or if it's in kind of a crowded setting, get very overwhelmed by that. Have a really hard time with different textures and are very picky about what they'll wear, what they'll touch, having that immediate need to clean their hands or their face if they get messy. I think having trouble with just following through with the routine of the day. So if it's, if there's constantly having to cue them, okay, so now it's time to get dressed, or now it's time to brush your teeth, or how to follow through with those cues to do that. Cleaning things up at home, even if it's taking away from the standpoint of I don't want to put my toys away, but knowing where those toys go or knowing how to find those things can be, another kind of sign that maybe we need challenges, because then that impacts kind of their ability to kind of organize themselves at school and follow the routines at school.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I am not seeing any further questions. So barring that, I just want to thank you so much, Denise, for coming and speaking to us today. And hopefully we can have you back again. Thanks.
I would love to. Thank you guys so much.